weird things happen when you ask smart people about their careers. If you ask them where they want to end up, they usually have some kind of answer. They want to become a great engineer, they want to work at a cool, prestigious company, they want to build a startup and make a whole bunch of money and solve difficult problems or whatever else. The answer may be super vague, but the ambition and intellect is definitely there. But if you ask them what they're going to do on some random Tuesday afternoon that makes that any more likely, everything gets a little bit more blurry. Maybe they should learn another programming language. Maybe they need to figure out if React or Vue is better. Maybe they should read a book about startups, or maybe they should make a portfolio, or read more Paul Graham essays, or maybe they should start grinding LeetCode, although nobody can quite explain whether LeetCode is the current problem or merely a traditional punishment for wanting a software job. How dare I we? I started thinking about this because there are plenty of people who want to study software engineering that are intelligent, ambitious, and incredibly capable, trivially capable of becoming excellent engineers. And they don't need to be convinced to care about their futures. But what they haven't learned yet, and what life hasn't taught them yet, is how to turn a desired outcome into a specific next move when no one else provides any of the instructions. School does a horrible job of teaching you this. It gives you a system that's designed by coastal elites that went to prestigious universities, that gives you a syllabus, assignments, deadlines, grading criteria, and a fairly clear and linear relationship between doing the work and receiving the reward. And you can become extremely good at executing within all of those systems. And then you get thrown into the real world and the syllabus vanishes, but none of the drive is gone and none of the intellect is gone. And you may even still roughly know what it is, but nobody tells you which assignment to complete next, which person to talk to, or whether or not you're actually making any progress. And the career model that pretty much all of us inherited from our parents is that you pick a job, you pick the degree, you complete said degree, apply to companies, and eventually through some literal act of divine intervention, someone selects you through an ATS filter and you make a bunch of money and you're happy. The degree is treated like a container with a career packaged inside of it. And that's not completely wrong, which is what makes it really dangerous. A degree can teach you really good fundamentals. It'll introduce you to good professors and even better classmates, and it can make you eligible for internships and put you in recruiting systems that would otherwise be super difficult to access if you did not have it. But it will not and cannot create the career for you anymore. It'll give you tools, it'll give you access, and maybe an initial credential signal that will bump you through the ranks a little bit. And then after that, people really only care about what you can actually do and what evidence exists that you can do it, and whether or not anyone credible or important has watched you work closely enough to trust you. And a career is not necessarily something that a degree just hands you off the bat. It is a sequence of increasingly difficult problems that people trust you to own. And that way of thinking completely changes the questions that you ask in relation to getting the outcomes that you want out of life. So let's suppose that someone might eventually want to become a fancy engineer at Palantir, forward deployed, let's say, forward deployed engineer at Palantir. That doesn't necessarily need to be your sacred destination, and the logo is not the point whatsoever. You could replace this with anything. It's just a useful proxy reference because the job represents a particular flavor of person that can enter a completely unclear mess of requirements and understand exactly what people need, build something that they want, deploy it, and then remain responsible for whether or not it works when it hits reality. So, instead of asking what degree gets me into Palantir, you ask what would have to be true about me for a company like that to want me over every other Carnegie Mellon clone that applies. Well, that person would probably need really strong computer science fundamentals. You would need enough data structures and algorithms knowledge to pass the interview. You would need proof that you can build software outside of the controlled environment of an assignment in a classroom. And you would probably need experience dealing with users who don't express their requirements clearly, and systems that fail for really stupid and annoying reasons at very annoying times of the day, and trade-offs that do not have answers in the back of a textbook that are very, very context dependent. You would also need to be able to communicate very well. You need to learn super clearly. And eventually, you would want strong engineers who knew your work well enough to say with a very high degree of confidence that you can handle a difficult opportunity. And once you describe the person who could plausibly get that said outcome, the outcome stops being some gigantic, ephemeral, mysterious object that no one except Groton to Harvard to Palantir pipeline kids can get. It just becomes a collection of things that you need to do. And you don't necessarily have to make all of them true this week. You have to figure out which one is currently missing from your stack. This is a far more useful question than just asking what language you should learn or what generic project would make a resume look impressive. You don't need to be the 5,000th person to clone Redis or some other open source project. Rust or whatever. Maybe you can code, and maybe you've never deployed anything. The next missing proof would be that you can make software work somewhere other than your own machine. Maybe you've deployed something, but nobody uses it. Then you need evidence that you can understand another person's problem and build something that they actually want. Maybe people use it, but it doesn't meaningfully affect any change in the world. Then you need to show that your work can save time, or money, or make money, or improve a decision, or remove some recurring kludge or schlep that someone has to wade through every single day. Or let's say that maybe you've done strong work, but no one outside of your immediate circle has seen it. Then the missing piece is not another project or more technical mastery. It may just be external trust. Or maybe your projects are incredible and you have great end-to-end ownership, but you would get mutilated on a leak code medium problem without any prep whatsoever. Or maybe you would just entirely disassociate on the phone call. And in that case, the bottleneck is not particularly subtle. You don't need to necessarily improve every dimension of yourself at once. You need to just find the current constraint and do something that produces evidence against it. Usually, the best way to do that is to own a real problem. People use the word ownership constantly, especially at companies and often on LinkedIn, but it often means that someone assigned me a larger task and allowed me to make a few unimportant decisions that don't really matter. Actual ownership means that you are responsible for whether the thing works. You have to understand the problem, you have to figure out who's going to use it, you have to figure out what success actually means and looks like, you have to pick an approach, you have to build it, deploy it, watch it blow up in your face and mire in the poor UX decisions that you made. You have to fix what you fundamentally understood about how people are going to use your thing and explain why you made the decisions that you made to people that know far more than you. And you can't hide behind the fact that you technically completed the instructions because the result is the instruction. You don't need to start some venture-backed company to practice this. All you need is one bounded piece of reality where someone else is not drawing the entire map for you. A project with 3 real users can teach you more than 5 enormous tutorial projects. And a tutorial teaches you how to implement something that someone else has already understood. A user forces you to decide what should be built and why and how in the first place. And they have absolutely not a care in the world that your architecture is elegant if the button that they need is broken. Once you're working on something real, you'll encounter problems that exceed your current judgment. And this is where other people become supremely useful. There are people that have spent so many more years than I've been alive developing way better models than I have and way better intuition for solving problems. And the mistake is approaching them by asking, "Oh, will you mentor me?" And that sounds completely harmless. And I mean, why would you not ask them for mentorship? But really, it is an unbelievably arrogant request for an undefined amount of future time. The person does not know what you need or whether you'll act on anything that they say or whether they are accidentally adopting a new dependent. You do not want to become this person's child. They probably already have those. A better approach is to find somebody whose work genuinely interests you and study enough of it to understand what they've done and ask one narrow question connected to something real that you're building. You're not asking them to manufacture your direction. You're just showing them the direction that you have already chosen and asking whether or not your model of reality is wrong. It probably is. And I learned this. It was a project that read SEC filings, and the goal was to just analyze companies and look at how they change over time. Earlier in the project, I sent one of my requirements documents to a mentor of mine, and one of his criticisms was that the validation was horrible. The easiest response would have just to been like add benchmarks and clean up the graphs and make it look all pretty and then announce that the validation had been tightened and I was the second coming of Terry Davis. And instead of just doing the normal thing, I started wondering why that was what he, one, noticed and communicated to me. And so I found out that he had published in chemical engineering, and so I read some of his papers. I was not trying to become a chemical engineer in the slightest. I think that sounds way too hard and not super interesting to me, but I believe that by reading his papers, I would be able to see what was important to him and what standards of evidence had become automatic for him. What controls did he expect to see? What alternative explanations would he try to eliminate? And how did he distinguish a real signal from an artifact that was created by just poor methodology? And what would have to be present before he or someone of his caliber trusted the result? And I tried to reconstruct the way of thinking that had produced his comments. And then I tried to transfer that way of thinking into how I would validate my idea. And that improved my work far more than it would have if I just took his words at face value and obeyed the literal sentence. point is not that everyone should go and read research pubs on whatever project they're working on whenever they receive feedback. That would be an absolutely deranged use of someone's evening. The point, rather, is that expert advice is often highly compressed, and that a very, very short comment may contain years and years and years of accumulated judgment, failure, trial, failure, more failure, and eventually success. And the expert may not necessarily explain every assumption behind it, either because they don't have time, or because those assumptions have become so obvious to them that they may no longer notice them, or that they trust that you're actually going to do the thing with what they tell you. When someone gives you good advice, don't ask what they told you to do literally at face value. Ask why they noticed that particular issue, what risk they can see that you can't, what standard they're using, and what evidence would convince them that the problem had actually been solved. And that's usually how mentorship develops. When most people ask for advice, they feel briefly energized and then they disappear because it's hard. Some return later with another broad question, having done nothing with the first answer. From the other person's perspective, helping them begins to feel like just making assignments for a student who never enrolled in their class. And that's exhausting for them, and maybe not for you, but it will be when they ghost you. The interesting people usually come back with evidence. They'll say, I tried what you suggested, this part worked, this part failed. I realized that one of my assumptions was horrifically wrong, here's what I changed, and here's the question that I have now. And the conversation becomes better because both people have more information. If you're the learner, you can ask better questions and learn why you suck, and the experienced person can see that their attention is actually producing something and that you are worth their time. As a repeated process, that can become a genuine mentoring relationship. It can also lead to introductions and referrals, but those are consequences of trust, not tricks for extracting access. A strong referral does not come from merely just knowing an important person on a first-name basis. It usually comes from them having seen how you think, watch how you respond to criticism, and learn what happens after they give you an opportunity. And when they recommend you, you have to think about it from their perspective. They're attaching their judgment, their professional reputation, to yours, and to the actions that you will take. They need to believe that doing such a thing will not make them look stupid to whoever you're going to go work for. And that's why networking, and I hate that word, is such a badly named activity. It sounds like that your job is to act like Ash from Pokemon and just collect job titles as if they're human Pokemon cards. The real objective is to build deep, lasting, potentially even career-long relationships with capable people who get what you're capable of and are invested in you. Hopefully, not only as a professional product, but also as a human being. Usually, though, as is with most transactional relationships, that begins with doing real work and becoming curious about how somebody else thinks and asking them valuable questions that are specific enough to answer, and then actually doing something meaningful with their time and said answer. It also requires a basic ability to imagine the situation from another person's perspective. Sometimes people call this theory of mind, and that makes it sound way more complicated than it is because that word was invented by people who can't see that the world is far less complicated than they think it is. You are trying to form a reasonable idea about what the other person cares about, what risks they see, what evidence might change their opinion, and by helping you would or would not feel worthwhile. You are not, in any sense of the word, reading their mind. Your hypothesis could be wrong. The point is to test it through interaction and update it when reality disagrees. Take, for example, a recruiter. They're not asking whether you seem intelligent. They are trying to reduce uncertainty and de-risk you. Can you code? Can you learn? Can you communicate with other people? Can you take responsibility for unclear problems, or do you need somebody to make you a task list every single morning? And at that point, your job is just an API call. A user is not evaluating the elegance of any of your abstractions, or how beautiful your code is, or how nice everything looks on the back end. All they care about is whether the software helps them and whether it creates additional work and what happens when it breaks. An experienced engineer reading your email is not deciding whether you deserve mentorship according to some universal evaluation heuristic. They're just picking whether or not the question is interesting out of the war zone there it is, their inbox, and whether it's easy enough to answer, and whether you seem likely to use the response. And once you get that, outreach becomes far less mysterious. Explain why you are contacting that particular person, what part of their work interested you, and what you've already tried, and what specific question you're asking. And that leaves them room to ignore you, because absolutely no one on this planet owes you a response. But there's another trap here, especially for intelligent and ambitious people. You can very much heavily overprepare, and it's never been easier to get absolutely nothing done but feel productive, especially with AI. You can read books, you can take courses, you can design elaborate career plans, you can polish projects that no one uses or cares about, and spend months studying how successful people behave. And all this looks productive, and it even feels productive, and some of it genuinely is productive. But it can also protect you from finding out whether or not your ideas survive contact with another human being, which is the ultimate test of whether or not you are good enough to generate economic value. Most people are. The useful cycle is usually to build until you encounter a class of problem, read the best explanation that you can find for that problem, and then return to the work with a better model. Architecture books become much more interesting after your architecture has become bad enough to hurt you. Advice about users becomes much more useful after a user has looked at something that you have built and claimed dastardly that it sucks and why you built none of the things that they needed. Do not read about building software instead of building software. Don't study networking instead of just contacting someone that's cool. Do not spend 6 months preparing to show users something that you could deploy badly next week. The awkward contact with reality is often where the most information is. So I would not try to go and map your entire life before you begin college. And most of that map would be fictional anyway, judging off of how quickly things move now. Pick a project or a meaningful part of a project that you can own from beginning to end. Figure out who the user is and talk to them and define what would have to change for that person to count it as useful. Then remain responsible for it long enough to discover what you misunderstood. Find 1 or 2 people whose work you find genuinely interesting. They could be professors or engineers at a big company, or researchers or founders, or even older students. Read what they have written or built. It is on the internet. Go find it. Ask each one of them one focused question connected to the problem in front of you. Then pick one recurring technical habit aimed at your actual bottleneck. Maybe that means doing a few LeetCode problems every single week. Maybe it means deploying one real feature every week. Or maybe it means learning enough C to understand what your higher level tools are hiding from you. And that habit matters only if it addresses a limitation that you currently have. After you've worked at it for a while, look at what happened. Which assumptions were wrong? What can you now prove that you could not prove before? Who has seen the work? What problems are you now capable of handling that would have been way too difficult a few months ago? That answer should determine what your next move is. And usually you don't need to know the whole path, you just need to make your own luck.